All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another Avid webinar. We are going to be continuing on this series where we are talking with venue users and integrators, etc., that are putting in venue systems all around the world. And we're going to carry that on this morning. So as is the normal format in our webinar series with Avid, we're going to hold the interview and the discussion, and then afterwards we will take some live Q&A. But that does not mean you cannot do Q&A during the webinar. You're welcome to post any questions that you might have up in the chat area. You're going to use the Q&A button, I believe, to do that, and we'll be collecting them all there. We can also answer them live in the chat as you're moving on and absorbing the presentation here. Okay, so this morning we are going to talk with an integrator that does a lot of church installations, etc. I think he does performing arts centers as well, but we'll find out that today. I'm going to welcome in a gentleman named Scott Clark, and he works with a company. He's the owner of a company called Strata AVL. So we're going to get down and get busy talking to Scott today and talk about everything that he's doing in this world, including with Venue. Okay. Good morning, Scott. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for joining us. Well, you know, maybe where we should start here, let's hear a little bit about Strata. I mean, this is a relatively new company. I think you mentioned you guys have been in business about 4 years. Is that right?
This 2021 is the start of our 4th year in business.
Nice. And it's you and 2 other partners. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a total of 4 now. 3 of us originally started it, and now we have a 4th partner on board.
Yeah. Where are you guys located? Where are you based out of?
Home office is in Atlanta.
Atlanta area. Nice. So, I mean, let's just kind of tunnel down here a little bit. What is your primary role at Strata? I mean, aside from owner, we know you're an owner, but I know you're very, very involved in the design work, etc. Is your focus primarily audio, or do you cover all the bases there?
My focus is primarily audio. This team of people is a group of mostly design engineers that came together through various contacts in the industry and all worked together as a group before from another company. And we firmly believe that in the best interest of our customers, that every discipline, whether it's audio, video, lighting, networking, acoustics, deserves to have somebody designing that discipline that has really spent, most of their life on the one thing. It's kind of hard to be, master of multiple disciplines, as we all know. And so, I mean, I feel like I could just spend a lifetime on just developing a speaker cone, let alone a speaker with consoles and microphones and everything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So I mean, that's admirable. I mean, we see so many companies that are not working that way. So I applaud you for taking on that. That's a good sign of integrity there. So talk about your customer base. Now, I know you do a lot of HOW. Do you work outside of houses of worship as well? Do you do other kinds of facilities?
House of worship is definitely the majority of our of what we do. We have the capabilities to reach beyond that. I have some stadium experience in performing arts centers, and really, we come from a background where a lot of us used to do even the corporate educational space, audio and video conferencing kind of stuff, but we really feel like there's enough companies out there that really serve the needs of that market really, really well already. Yeah. And we believe that we're kind of custom tailored in what we do to be able to provide custom solutions to our customers. We believe that, especially in the house of worship market, the needs can vary so greatly that being aware of the kinds of products that the industry is able to provide in the current day, matched with the physics of what's going on behind the scenes, matched with the human experience and the human perception, is kind of what creates the triangle of our philosophy of design for our projects.
Right. I'm just amazed by it. It seems like I get a little more amazed by it every year of what has transpired in the church markets. And I even get squirrely calling it a church market at times. I mean, it's the live event market. But I'm constantly amazed at the intricacy and the depth of some of these installations in these churches I go into. I mean, it rivals anything we do in performing arts and broadcast now, and sometimes surpasses it. Honestly, it's just amazing to see it. And I think now, I'll see if you concur with this. Now with the whole push for streaming, I mean, everybody's a broadcaster now. Everyone is a broadcaster now, including these facilities. So, streaming is with us to stay. So now we're going to have to deal with all the technical demands of that as well. So have you seen that kind of impact in your designs, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, once the pandemic hit, there were so many people, wanting cameras and streaming encoders and the like, that, the industry ran out of product fairly quickly, actually. And it was
Man, I'm telling you, there was a blackout on web cameras there for a period of
time. But I think, a lot of it has to do with the changing culture too. And, where a lot of people are introduced to churches first by watching a stream during the week instead of attending physically. Even before the pandemic hit, that was starting to happen. And what we've seen is a big shift in culture where, before the era of smartphones and everyone on the internet, all day long, every single day from their device, the Disney style of broadcast messaging, hey, come in and see us, and then we'll take it from there, used to work. I think the challenge nowadays is that everyone's really tired of being commercialized, because that they're facing that all day long on their device. And I think people are really wanting to be something bigger than a part of themselves, and a part of a bigger story. And I think that leveraging technology to minimize distraction and maximize focus in a space, in a live performance space, so that you can communicate a message effectively, is really critical. And churches are finding that out. And so they're more interested in how do we create the experience from an interior design perspective, from a creative perspective, and all of that kind of speaks to how technology can then be implemented in order to support those things to create that experience.
I think it's a really interesting paradigm what's happening here right now. On the one hand, I mean, I'm old enough to remember going to church, and if you couldn't make it to the service, saying to someone, "Hey, pick me up a cassette of the service and bring it home to me, so I can check out the message." Right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember that. Well, today, I mean, that's completely flipped on its head, right? Where we're in a situation now where you can watch the service on demand. It's like you don't even have to tune into the broadcast. They're going to repost it for on demand. You can watch it at any time. So, the pressure then becomes, how do I make that broadcast element as engaging as being there? And I think to some degree, at least I want to believe this, it's actually going to put value back on attending the service. Like all of a sudden, actually being there and experiencing it in the moment is going to become a good thing. It's going to become an attractive thing. People are going to want to do that. I think we're going to see that in concerts. I think we're going to see that even in sports, et cetera. For as good as the broadcast element it is, it puts value actually on being there, because that's the unique part now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenges for churches as it relates to the broadcast and streaming part is most churches don't have television level director and producers on staff, right, and engineers that make it happen. And so they rely heavily on contacts they have, in certain cases, integrators, hopefully in our case, where they're relying on experts to kind of help them. And I think that when you're trying to communicate that kind of message for that period of time, one of the challenges is being able to understand the psychology of somebody watching a screen, and how often you take the next camera shot, and do you stay in one place or do you flip to different shots around the room? How distracting is that during different times in the service?
Right.
And
so
those
true.
things are so critical to being able to hold somebody's focus nowadays, because everyone is ADD. Everyone's looking. I mean, look at us right now. We probably have people watching our screen, and they might have an internet screen up, and we have multiple screens on our desks and the camera, and we're looking around, and it's hard to be able to grab somebody for that amount of time.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on the money there. And I think it speaks very highly to the need for proper, contextual directorial skills in that market. And I've said this for a long time, even we go back, kind of pre-streaming, et cetera, even with audio, It's like, I can remember talking to many church senior leaders about this. It's like, look, you've got to treat audio with a little more kind of respect here in terms of its impact on your listeners and your congregation when this is going on. This is not a janitorial process. We don't just come in and flip on the sound. There's a way to do this and have it be very engaging for the people that are sitting there listening. And if it's not done well, the engagement's not going to be there,
Yeah, I
So
love that.
multiply that times 10 for the broadcast, right?
No, I love that segue because in my studies of human psychology and physiology of sound, trying to really dig down into that human experience portion of design, perspective, and perception. One of the things I ran across that was really interesting was a study that was done where not only do we all mostly know that audio engages most all of our brain, but the reason why it engages most of our brain. And, our hearing is the only sense that we have where our first response to it is an involuntary emotional response. And I talk about this, the people that have heard me speak at various conventions and so on and so forth, it might have heard this before, but that emotional experience that we have and that emotional reaction that we have drives our thought process and our logic and our physiology and everything else. And audio is the only thing that does that. Video doesn't do that. The sense of touch, it doesn't do the same thing that audio does. And one of the things that I think makes it a harder pill to swallow is the guy behind an audio console is only part of the equation. If I design a lighting show and I point the light and give it that intensity and that color, every time I hit the button, that light should go to the same position with the same intensity and color. And in audio, the sound guy behind the console, the engineer, doesn't have control over what the source is giving him. And typically that changes. In fact, it changes most all the time, every second. Yeah. And so we're in something where we're trying to control something that is extremely important to humans and the human experience. Yet a lot of that depends on how consistent our source is, and the fact that we're having to constantly make adjustments to make it.
And also how nimble that mixer is. I mean, in terms of being able to recognize it and adapt and adjust for it, right? That's the skill, right? That's the skill. Not how to route on the console. That's the skill.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, kind of speaking to that a little bit, do you guys at Strata, I don't think I asked you this when we were talking previously to this session, but do you guys offer any kind of training that's kind of geared toward this for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. We always definitely offer first use support, and our training is before that. And so typically we like to at least get a rehearsal. And now with obviously virtual sound check capabilities, training is a lot easier. You can go a lot deeper because you don't have a kick drummer hitting the kick drum 200 times on quarter beat notes. The splits get tired now, and it's not the same as it was in the beginning, right? So now you can literally have their band come in, and as long as their monitoring is good, you can get your levels set, get their ears good, record a session down of a couple songs, and then they can all go home, and we can now train on how to really engage the front of house mix.
Right. I think what you touched on there is so important in house of worship, especially where you're trying to create a worship environment. And it's where virtual sound check really makes its bones, is because, not just mixing the music, obviously that's a huge piece of it, is mixing the music and making it fit the moment, but also being able to sit there with your lighting staff, with your video staff, and work on transitional elements and make things have some flow to it, so that you don't have all those awkward silences and all that awkwardness in the service when it's going on that we've all had in the past, when it was just like, okay, we're going to show up at 6 on Sunday and do a cue to cue, and here we go. Right. There's a lot at risk there.
Yeah, the pandemic has even exacerbated that a little bit in terms of, it's harder to get together for rehearsals because people couldn't gather in the space.
Right.
And they wanted to limit gatherings, including the band gathering in the space. So being able to either use older material to help generate the mix for Sunday morning, or, if you have, typically churches will have musicians trading out. So you'll have different singers, different band members, drummers, so on and so forth. And being able to kind of bring those things up to the forefront in a mix, I think, to get prepared for a fast Sunday morning is definitely critical.
Yeah. Well, this is all a really great discussion. I mean, let's take a look at this in the real world a little bit. After our talk yesterday, we kind of decided to take a look at one of your clients, which is in the build phase, right? This is not even finished yet, but we're going to take a look at Compass Church, and that's here in Phoenix, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know I see Matt Lawrence in the room here, and I know this is your church, right, Matt? Maybe I'll just invite you into the conversation here, Matt. Why don't you come in the conversation here, because I know you've been dealing directly with Scott on this deal and this build out. Maybe you can provide some insight to this as well here. This might be kind of nice. Thanks for showing up here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is my home church here in Arizona. From where I'm sitting, I can probably throw a stone that way.
Don't
and
do
yes,
it,
for the
man.
last
Don't do it.
for the last 2 years, it being in the congregation, it was okay. We're going to go through an uncharted journey. And this was before the pandemic, right? And, the uncharted journey of, okay, we're going to build a bigger building. We're going to go through, some changes. And then little did we know, obviously, with the pandemic, how uncharted that would really be, right?
Right.
Crazy title. But yeah, it's on the same grounds. So it's literally right next door. And it's a 2,000 seat congregation where it was basically from a blank slate. And the idea is the engineer Tori there wanted to put 3 S6Ls, one for front of house, one for monitors, and one for broadcast. And I think that Scott, we kind of together learned as the broadcast, and you guys were talking about where that lands. Avid obviously has the S6 and S4, but we also have the S6L and the all the Ls, right? And what that looks like, and why would you want that particular desk? Right. So
well, we're gonna go down that conversation here. So, let's
Scott,
start at the beginning here a little bit.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I think one thing to note is that the church was searching for an integrator and actually chose us before I even knew Matt existed.
Well, that was going to be one of my first questions here is like, how did you guys meet? How did you, I mean, let's back up just a little bit and talk about that process a little bit of how the church chose you guys as an integrator, and then we'll come into venue land there.
Yeah, they interviewed a couple of integrators, and actually some of the people in decision-making positions at the church had experience with other integrators, lots of experience actually with other integrators. And we went in and did an interview, and here's who we are, and here's what we do and why we do it. And I think a lot of the Strata process, which would take too much time to go into here, and people are welcome to search that out. It's on our website. But I think a lot of that process is the reason why the church chose us. We pay very particular attention on the discovery side of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so making logical choices, not going in saying, we know what you need, here's an equipment list, here's a price, or here's a good, better, best. We are completely allergic to those kinds of situations. We believe in discovering what our customers think that they want to be able to do, ask them intelligent questions to pull more information out of them about what the church looks like now, and also what they see it looks like 5-10 years down into the future, as you see on the tagline there. And then we believe in presenting multiple options with benefit and compromise as the advisor in the process, so that once selections are made for equipment, that our customers understand why that selection was made, what that piece of equipment will do, what it will not do, and how much they're paying for it. And we think that that is really critical to our customers understanding exactly what's going to happen and why, and what the return on the investment is, which is a big deal for most churches.
Right. Well, let's dig in here a little bit. I mean, that is fantastic. So we've got a few slides here to go through. So this is kind of a bird's eye view of the floor plan, right? So
yeah,
maybe, and we don't have to go into this in great detail, Scott. I'm just trying to put some context on this for people here of what is in play here. So it looks like you got a nice fan-shaped room there. I think Matt said it was about 2,000 people. Is that right?
Yeah, 2,000 seats.
Yeah.
So,
and this was a build from the ground up, or this was an adaptation?
No, this is a ground up build. So starting digging in the dirt, and one of the critical paths for us was working with the architects They already had a somewhat of a shape of the building. And actually the architect said, after working with us further, that he would have rathered that he was able to get us into the process in designing the shell, because for some acoustics reasons, if you can change a little bit of this or a little bit of that and, get a much better acoustical result, he was actually really looking forward to a project where we could be in from the very beginning. But we were able to speak into some of the interior spaces.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
changing up the backstage a little bit, the rack locations, there's a little bit of a studio space and a studio mix room, the control room, which is under front of house, under the stadium seats in the back. Some of those locations, how many people are going in those locations? What are those people doing? How much room do those the furniture design? There's a lot of questions that have to be answered to do this properly, we feel, that people don't really understand until you go through the whole process.
Yeah.
So
I think they're very fortunate that you guys are involved in the build from the ground up. It's so, gosh, it's just so important to have the integrator, especially because you guys have people on staff that have acoustical background as well, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so important to have those people involved in the process as early as possible.
Yeah, I'm primarily audio and speaker system design, consoles, that kind of thing, infrastructure. And then we also have a gentleman that works with us that has a degree in acoustics, and that's all he spends his time doing. And that goes back to what I was saying before about having absolute experts in every single discipline. As audio guys and speaker design guys, we know something about acoustics, but we don't spend our whole life on just that. And so,
I mean, our focus is in electroacoustics, right? I mean, not necessarily, acoustic fundamentals in building design and in spatial design, right? So,
right.
So let's kind of dig in here a little bit on how you ended up choosing Venue, and I will just come right out and say it. From what I understand, you guys are a huge supporter of Venue. You guys are a big proponent of this, and I think you did this. Just correct me if I'm wrong here. I think you guys went through the vetting process for console choices, not only just for this church, but to find the platform that you were going to promote going forward. And I was really impressed with how much or how deep the vetting process was that you went through. Can you kind of describe that for everybody a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll describe that first and then talk about how we arrived at this decision with Compass. So, again, like I said before, we definitely, we are all about choosing the correct product for the correct situation. And in order to do that, you have to be fully aware of what the capabilities of products are and also what the cost impact is of those products. And I had the opportunity to actually pull in 5 different manufacturers into a room by myself. And that room was about 450 seats, very well absorbed. And I used just 2 point source speakers on sticks for a left, right, and a subwoofer so that I didn't have to worry about destructive interaction between different speakers in a very well absorbed space to try to take out as much of that part of the equation as possible.
Sure.
And I was able to set up 5 different consoles and run for 2 weeks. I was able to run mixes and tests using up to 48 channels of actually church generated from the stage, tracks, stuff that has to be worked on, stuff that's not studio perfect, stuff where you really have to use EQs, gates, compressors, filters, everything up to effects. And it was really interesting to experience the difference between just playing 1 or 2 channels through a console or being 2 different consoles with 1 or 2 channels and spending 2 weeks putting together a 48 channel mix. And for me, the definite clear winner in terms of mix bus and mixing space, as I would call it, was the Avid platform. Unlike Venue, because a lot of guys know Venue, and I used to mix on Venue, and yes, I'll go there. I feel like S6L is a whole nother console manufacturer. It's such a giant 180 from, Venue was great for its time and what it could do, but if anyone had used anything, more current since Venue, they would think it would sound better, and I could understand why.
And I think we always felt when we were putting together, that we really wanted S6L to be an extension of Venue operationally. But
right.
We knew in terms of sound quality, we were going to go completely way out on the horizon in terms of next generation audio quality. I mean, that was the underlying goal there for sure.
What that experience did for me is the way I try to describe it to all of our customers and potential customers is that I feel like as a mix engineer, which I mix every week, I feel like as a mix engineer, the Avid platform has a really big natural space. There's a depth, there's a width, there's a height, and every single element that I add to the mix has its own place in that space. Yeah. And I don't feel like any element is competing with another element in the mix. And that's where I think Avid really stands out. And then you combine that with the new UI and the ability to have multiple touch screens with multiple different channels being selected at the same time. We got away from the mouse, the Venue stuff, the new S6L stuff, everything is a touch of a button away. And as we talked about, that's critical in a church scenario. I'm sure we'll go there. But, as that relates to Compass, they actually had been on the Venue platform and they were looking to go actually a different route because they hadn't been in front of S6L yet. And so we kind of tossed out, here's the benefits and compromises of each platform as we have installed them and what our customers have decided. And when we looked at what Compass wanted to be able to do, to be able to create music, create worship songs, and talking about, the front of house position, the studio position, the monitor engineer, sharing inputs, gain sharing, the ability to gain share without having to turn it on and off to adjust an analog gain. All of those decisions, Avid easily won out after a demo that Matt did at the church as the clear selection for this situation.
So I want to touch on something you said there, which I don't know if I realized. So in Venue or in Compass's previous campus or their existing campus, were they on Venue there? Were they on Profile or something? Profile. Wow, that I didn't know that. So that begs another question.
It's actually an SC48.
Oh, it was an SC48.
Sorry. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. No problem.
So do you think the operational transition was eased a little bit by going to S6L when people were coming from SC48 up to S6L? Did that ease any fears?
Absolutely, of course. Obviously, if you're used to the Venue setup, then the computer screen mouse section looks almost exactly identical, right? And so there's definitely some comfortability in that. But again, what's interesting is as I see people that move from Venue to S6L, they actually, even though they were used to being on a mouse more, they actually get off of the touchscreen and the mouse with S6L, and they actually start going back to the analog days where your knob's on the console.
Yeah, that was certainly our goal by putting that many encoders on there. If you wanted to get back to a very analog-ish workflow, you could do it very easily on S6L.
And I think in church, there's not even a question in my mind. I started to touch on this, but in a concert venue setting where you're doing an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours worth of music, if you spend the first 5-10 minutes, you've done sound check and you're getting used to the room and now it's filled up with people. So there's been some changes acoustically and, you're dialing in the mix. It's close, but you're still dialing it in, 10 minutes later, you're still okay because for the next hour and a half, it's going to sound phenomenal and people are going to kind of forget about what it sounded like for the first 10 minutes. In a church world, you have 10, 15 minutes total of music on a Sunday morning and it's different musicians and it's different songs. And, you don't really have a 12, 15 week rehearsal section before you take it out on the road or out on tour. Like the big tours do. And so the ability to get to what you need to get to as quickly as possible and maximize the efficiency of your time behind the console in that first 30 seconds is gigantic. And so moving to this kind of workflow with the encoders, how they're laid out, the user layers. I do user layers where I might just change 2 faders and leave everything else the same so that I know what's coming up next and I have quick access to that, but I still keep everything where it is. The ability to do those things, the VCA spills, all that kind of stuff is absolutely critical to a church workflow.
Well, talking about getting people, kind of on the console, getting them used to it, et cetera. I know you mentioned in the little meeting we had here right before we started today that you had done some remote demoing with Chant Peck, one of our specialists. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently did a demo in Arkansas, and it was kind of a beta test for being able to do a remote demo being via, sorry, a Zoom session. And one of the really cool things, we had about 8 people there, and I actually had set up the console and I had been able to record their worship band the night before. So I just got their ears mix going, turned off the front of house speakers, recorded a couple of songs, and then the second day, Chant was able to remote in, and he was able to remote into their console actually that we had
Mhm.
on site, and they saw him, with the mouse on their console, showing them here's where this stuff is, and we built a mix and demonstrated the console, and that was not only critical for demos, but I see that really being able to be used as a tool for Avid and maybe even integrators down the road, where if you're having a problem or you don't quite know how you routed something, especially with the new bus to bus routing, all that kind of stuff, if you get stuck as a church because you haven't been using it for a year, the
Mhm.
ability to remote in and show you, oh, here's where you did that, and here's how to get out of it, and here's what you need to know, I think it's
Yeah.
really crucial.
I think I agree with you 100% there. I think especially so for integrators, but also for us at Avid as well. I mean, it's a huge advantage just from a communications point of view to, instead of trying to describe something over the phone or holding up a FaceTime to the phone or things like that, just say, let me log into your desk and I'll show you what you need to do here. Especially like on a Sunday morning at 6:30, being able to call the integrator and go, we can't get audio to come out of the console. Let me log in. Oh, you haven't got this VCA up, that kind of thing, man. It's a huge benefit. I don't know if any of the guys that are watching this saw us do this. We just did this recently at AES Nashville for the spring training thing, where both Chant and I were remoted into the desk that was on site at the trade show. So I think you're going to see this kind of thing really take off here, where we can do this sort of thing. I know we're going to really try to do it a lot here at Avid going forward. It's just a huge advantage to be able to do it. I think you're going to see all kinds of remote workflows kind of come to the fore now, and I think streaming has kind of driven that to some degree. But there's so many other uses for it. We probably don't even know them all right now.
Right, absolutely.
So let's jump into some of the particulars of your uh, setup here, and maybe you know maybe you and Matt can talk through this or something. Talk about the control surface choices, the engine choices, the IO choices, maybe IO location, things like that, that you decided to do for Compass here.
Yeah, one of the things that we always take a look at in all of our designs is we model everything in three-dimensional space, and one of the really critical things for that. Not only could you argue that for speaker system design for proper coverage, but in this case, as you can see, sightlines are a big deal, and keeping the speaker arrays out of the screens. One of the things that was interesting about this case was, for a 2,000 seat space, the ceiling height was actually really low originally.
Mm.
And we were going to have to shorten the arrays and add delay speakers because of the depth of the space. Otherwise, the arrays would have been into the tops of the LED walls. And we actually recommended that the whole roof line of the building be raised to accommodate the technology for a better experience. And actually, we raised the ceiling height 4 feet in the space. And so the ability to model and look at sightlines and workflow, can the front of house engineer see over the people that are standing? Is the front of house booth tall enough? Is there enough room for the people and the workflow that's going to go on? Is a big deal to us. So
Yeah,
this
it's
kind
a
of
big
just
deal
shows,
to us as mixers too, I gotta tell you.
right? Well, you always compete for space because, especially in the broadcast world, you want your center cameras on center.
Yeah.
You don't want the parallax effect when you have a camera in the center of the room showing a wide shot. However, as audio guys, we want to be in the center of the room, to have that, center channel be in the center of our image as we're mixing. And so being able to design spaces where both are possible. Yes, in this case, the front of house guy, the camera could be blocking one head, here or there, but you moved inside a little bit and you can see what's going on. I'd rather be in the center of the room for what I'm hearing, in this case.
So what kind of dictated, your control surface sizes, the amount of IO, the type of IO, things like that. What criteria did you use to choose? Because I noticed you have all the same engine sizes on your systems here, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is for the church wanted future expansion,
Yeah.
and so that was an easier way to do that. In terms of surface sizes, I'm an older mix guy, and I like more faders. I like having more things at my fingertip without a bunch of layers. And I think that if inputs wise, if your source list is above 48 sources or even 64 sources, having at least a 32D at front of house to make the adjustments you need to make in the room is pretty critical. A 24D in this case for the broadcast mix, and a 24D for the monitor engineers. Monitor mixes usually don't change nearly as much once everything is set as a front of house mix would. And then with broadcast, it's a matter of saving space, being able to fit into the room. And you might not have quite as many faders at your fingertips. But in this case, it's okay. So some of it's budget driven, some of it is space driven. And there's a lot of factors that we look at when deciding those. In terms of IO, one of the things that Venue has brought to the table lately, or S6L has brought to the table lately, is the ability to do star configurations with stage boxes. And
I was just going to go there. So thank you for picking up the ball and running there. I was going to say, how important was that to your decision here?
Yeah, you asked about IO, and that's really important because cable and copper is expensive, and multi-pin connectors are expensive, and snakes and floor pockets are expensive. And being able, first of all, to eliminate the expense of a lot of infrastructure in terms of stage inputs that all go back to a patch bay that you then patch into a stage rack, there's a lot of cost savings in installation, even because you're not soldering all those XLRs as well. You don't have the rack space. You're not paying for the racks. You're not paying for the patch panels to be made. So being able to jump onto a network type infrastructure via star configuration and just have your smaller stage boxes, being able to set them by the drums or by the keys platforms, and being able to plug it into a CAT infrastructure, CAT 6 or CAT 6A or whatever the designer is choosing for the distance and the size of the space, is critical to workflow in a church, and also to be able to change things up. One of the things that we really believe in the church market is that your design, in terms of the backbone of the design, should be as dynamic as possible. So what if we decide to move our drums to the side or to the center? Okay, well, if you have a drums platform with a stage box on it, you roll it to wherever you want it, you plug it into the CAT infrastructure, that's the network infrastructure that's closest to where it is, you make a patch to the switch back in your rack room, and you're good to go in the new location. Same thing with pipe grids and all that kind of stuff above the stage, where, if you want to rearrange your LED walls, rearrange your stage look, you have the backbone that's able to support all that without having to look at rigging and hire a rigging engineer every time. No, we can hang anywhere we need to. We have an infrastructure that supports that. It kind of reminds me of the old television broadcast black box days, where you had a grid, in kind of a studio setting, and you built what you want in that in order to create the situation that you need to create for that time. And that's kind of the direction churches are going these days.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's easy at times to kind of dismiss the savings that come with a good infrastructure there, especially in this situation. But boy, you start aggregating all the savings in terms of cost and time, and it becomes very real. I mean, that is a significant cost. And if you can present that to your client in those kind of terms of, time savings, cost savings, reliability, it kind of becomes a no-brainer. I mean, just to do it, Well, let's, I got the slide up here for that looks like your broadcast room, right?
Yeah.
That's correct. And, this is a unique situation, how you guys have handled it, but the challenge is not unique. And I think it warrants some time to dig down on this. Because I think you guys went through what a lot of people are going through right now, especially in the church world, who are trying to build broadcast environments. It's like, well, do I use my live sound console back there to mix for the broadcast and the stream, or do I use something in a DAW? Matter of fact, if any of you heard the podcast I just did recently with MXU, this was a central point of the discussion. Should we ever be mixing on a DAW live? And we addressed that question and we could have talked about it for hours, I think, but in about 90 minutes. But I think you guys have settled on you're going to use both. Is that correct here?
Yeah, eventually. And so, again, one of our design criteria is what our website says, build for the future. And so what this is depicting here is eventually the church expects to get an S4. That's not going to be in the beginning, but that was the whole decision budget-wise. Do we go with an S4 and mix in Pro Tools or Broadcast, or do we go with another S6L console engine, right? Surface and engine. Yeah. And deciding that is really based on critical path, I think. In terms of input output, the benefits of using another S6L platform enable you to use the IO that's already in a networked system. But even more critically than that, I think one of the big points that Chant Peck brought up in the discussion was that at the end of the day, a DAW on a computer is running on that computer that hasn't been optimized to never crash, never quit, never stop running audio. And yes, computers have gotten better and more reliable, and you might not ever experience a crash. However, if you can't afford to ever experience a crash, the computer that's running S6L has been designed and optimized and locked down to never quit, keep running audio, and make sure that you're good to go every single time you broadcast. And I think
I was just going to say, I think the language we spoke about with that is that it's purpose built, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you have a product there that is purpose built, not only to run in a live environment, but also to operate in a live environment, right? That's really the kind of the tipping point of the two differences there. And when I've kind of consulted on this kind of thing with other customers and stuff, really the question comes down to workflow, right? It's like, okay, are you only going to live stream, or are you going to live stream, capture, and then sweeten for repost, right? And depending on which kind of path you go, and I think in your situation, building for the future here, you're saying to them, look, we're going to be able to do both at some point in the future here. You're going to have the best of both worlds there. But whichever one of those paths you take can kind of swing the pendulum in one side or the other of which platform you choose there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's part of, again, what makes the decision difficult is choosing just one over the other. The compromises are actually pretty significant. Do I choose to not have my fader control, right, recorded as automation and just be able to sweeten it later, which that's a big time savings thing? Or do I choose to go with like an S4 and not have the user interface and the dependability day to day of a live
no snapshot automation? That's what makes mixing on something like S4 for live broadcast so tough. And
I think for Compass, when it comes down to it, they really don't want to deal with the compromises of either. They wanted the best of both, and it's like, okay, if that's really the decision because you're really kind of unwilling to live with the compromise, then let's set you up so that you can eventually have both at the same time.
Well, if it's not apparent to the end users here, one of the really beautiful things that you're going to have here when you do this kind of setup is that live broadcast mixer can be mixing to broadcast. And at the same time, because you're capturing to Pro Tools, you could be capturing to Pro Tools and building the Pro Tools mix on the S4 at the same time, right? Because that Pro Tools system that you're capturing with is going to be the engine for the S4.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of really, really good going on there in terms of workflow. I mean, talk about efficiency, man. I mean, you could have a really, really efficient workflow there.
Absolutely.
Matt, you want to chime in here? Like maybe talk a little bit about your interactions with Scott in terms of, choices and helping him, try to get the right products for the right job here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to go back a little bit, as Scott said, he was working with the church prior to him and I actually meeting each other. and Scott came out to do something with the church, talk about some cameras. I think it was Scott, if I remember right. And we ended up going to lunch. It was the first time we actually met each other, and a lot of similar views of helping customers, facilitating, like Scott said, the future of the church, not just the immediate sale. A lot of our similarities matched up. So when we actually started talking about the gear, it was, I remember us sitting in that Mexican restaurant, calling Chant and saying, about the S4 or the S6 and which one and how we'd go about that. But I think that the thing that I take away, not just from this situation, but in general, when it comes to talking to customers about S6L and the platform, probably the one thing that comes up that I guess push a little bit more, not necessarily just, this is the customer and whatever their needs are. The one thing that I do push probably a little bit more, which was also with this church, which happens to be my home church, as we talked about, the last thing you want to do is spend more money, I guess, as a church, right? But you want the right thing and you want future proof. And the one thing that I always push is the engine size. You mentioned, Robert, all of them are 192s. They actually, if I remember right, we're trying to go with 144s, which we all know, same, sound and awesomeness. But as far as going from future proofing, especially if you're tying the three systems together, we went down this whole road, the idea of being able to capture, the full amount of inputs and the full amount of outputs, you can't go back, right? You might be able to get a bigger surface. You might be able to add IO. You might be able to do these, but when you're in the engine, you're locked. Right. So there's always this, and that's always my pushing of, let's make sure we go to this next. And I actually had one of the head guys at the church hit me up and say, are you sure we really need this? Like, yeah. Matt, you're part of the congregation. Is this really what we need? And so that's where I think coming as Scott being, an owner / user and, me being an engineer / sales manager, there is this constant, how do we help you facilitate getting the best thing you need, but also getting the thing that you might not know you need later on down the road.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's kind of counterintuitive at times, but it is the driving force behind the platform concept for S6L, where, you can take something like the engine and say, okay, I'm going to future-proof our system by buying the biggest engine, because now I can change control surface, I can change IO size at will, and still have the most powerful system available to me, or expand to the biggest, most powerful system at any point. By contrast, if you were to compare that to, some of our competitor manufacturers that have the engine built into the surface, well, now if you didn't buy the most powerful piece of that, you're going to have to change surface and engine, etc., in order to upgrade that system and expand it going forward. So here, Scott's, I think, made the right choice here, certainly, by putting the most powerful engine in, and then you can change out control surfaces and IOs to your heart's content on any one of the components of this system and rescale it, So I applaud you for doing it. It's what I promote to people all the time as well. Don't skimp on the engine, spend your money on the engine, so great stuff.
I'll do one more thing with Scott and I think the coolest part about kind of the reason, one of our marketing manager came to me and said, hey, who do you want to get on? What would it make sense? And I think probably the coolest part about Scott and Strata is the idea that, he is the owner, coupled with the user, coupled with the really wanting the best for the customer, and the kind of the trifecta of especially when some of the churches come to an integrator and just say, you know what, I really don't know. I know we need the best product. I just don't want to get taken advantage of, and I want to make sure that I'm told the right things. And when Scott and I had our lunch, it was pretty much I want to do the best thing for the customer, and I know that in the end, I will be looked after. And that was when I was like, okay, that's it. So kudos to you, Scott.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Scott, I guess we can go down one more level here if you want. I don't want to tunnel in too deep on what you guys are doing here. We really were here to talk about your choice of venue and how you came across the line and are going to promote it going forward. But one of the things you're doing here that's unique, and obviously you're not going to be able to see it in this level of detail. I put this up here just as kind of a menu item to drive the conversation. One of the things that one of the challenges you ran into was dealing with high density Dante with Venue, and how to get multiple channels of Dante being able to be transported anywhere into the system, et cetera. And you came up with a really unique solution. And it's one of those things that Dante's a kind of a fixed platform, by Audinate, et cetera. And we certainly are always encouraging people, if you can use third-party products to make this sort of thing happen, my goodness, go right ahead. That's part of what system engineering is all about. But you came up with a really unique solution, I thought, for dealing with Dante distribution. Can you describe it for us? Can you kind of walk us through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you use Dante through a stage rack, one of the things that is one of the challenges with that is that those inputs into the stage rack, whatever they are, they're available at all three consoles, yes. But if microphone 1 is Dante input 1, then Dante input 1 can't be anything other than microphone 1 at all three consoles. It's not discrete. And so because they share, that sometimes limits the capability of being able to do different things in different spaces, because sometimes you don't need at monitors what you have at front of house, and you don't need at broadcast what you have at monitors. And so being able to have discrete inputs and outputs, same thing with outputs, right? So being able to do discrete with Dante, I think is a big deal, especially in terms of flexibility and functionality, which is, those two things we're always looking at when we design systems. And so in that vein, what I decided to do in this situation is use MADI cards in the engines, which gives us 64 channels bidirectional discrete audio in and out of every single engine and surface system. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking those MADI cards to a MADI card in another frame. And that MADI card, the really nice thing about it is it's a 128 channel MADI card at 96K. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to, in one card in a third-party frame, take two S6L engines, 64 channels bidirectional, and now I have all 128 of those channels in one card. And then I use a second 128 channel Dante card at 96K. And now I've got full discrete bidirectional 64 channels of Dante via MADI in and out of each console surface pair. And another thing for the people that are interested is there's a lot of Dante products that aren't doing 96K yet. Sure, ULXD microphones are a prime example. I would love for them to be able to get onto 96K, as probably a lot of people would, but we're just not there yet. So what do we do? Well, this third-party frame actually has a third card slot. And so I'm using a third or a second Dante card in the third slot running at 48K, because this frame also happens to have sample rate conversion on every single slot. And so it gives me a really unique way to get a lot of flexibility through S6L in and out, and also be able to up convert and down convert Dante between 96 and 48K at the same time.
Right, right. Well, I'm sure if listeners are wondering how you do that, am I okay to promote them to reach out to you to see how you're doing that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, go to the Strata website, and I'm sure there's ways to get in contact with Scott there. If you want to reach out for how he's doing this, how he's accomplishing it, maybe you can pull it together. I thought it was a really, really clever way to do it and have it be almost infinitely nimble there. So it was really cool. All right. Well, I think we're just about coming up on the hour here. So maybe we can pull off for some questions here. Chant, have you been gathering any questions in the background? Maybe we'll have a few listeners.
But you guys pretty much nailed them throughout this presentation. So,
well, we did a good job finally.
You did. You covered everything quite well. One that I'm sure a number of people out there would have specifically for you, Scott, would be if you're a church and you're looking to get into this process, what would you recommend for them in terms of just kind of first steps, what to really look out for, just to make them feel comfortable as they try to expand their AVL system at their church?
Yeah, I think that and in fact, Robert and I were talking about this yesterday, in the fact that a lot of churches, unfortunately, in years past, have been taken advantage of, and that's created a segment of our industry in the AVL world, in churches, that it's become very difficult to trust who they're working with.
Yep.
And I think doing kind of your homework, in seeking out an integrator with references that you absolutely know that you can trust, and also looking for one that really walks you through the decision-making process. I think the mistake that a lot of people make is, oh, I don't know anything about that, so I just need someone to come in and tell me what I need and give me a price. And I think that, that might be the easy way out in the beginning for some people. And I get why. We're all busy and we sometimes feel like that's what we have to do. But the long-term effect of that is, after the systems go in, it's, oh, wait, but I thought it was going to do this and it was supposed to do that. And wait, we were supposed to have something there. And I can't quite see the letters on that screen. Well, yeah, you didn't have the budget for that. And so we had to go with a smaller screen, and you just said, give us what we need. And so, those situations are the pitfalls. And so really finding someone that truly is asking a lot of questions, really able to visit you from an engineering perspective, not just some sales guy who can't kind of explain the options that are in front of you and kind of the direction that they want to help you go through, is critical to finding the right integrator. And that's really the key to being successful in any project.
Well, I think for our success, really all we need to do is make sure that we have a venue salesman who attends every church. That's that way he can hook up with the integrator.
Matt, you're booked for the next 5 years, buddy. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to be cheeky there. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us today. I mean, I love the work you're doing here. I mean, it looks really, really great. The beauty for me is I'm going to be able to go down and see this in action at some point here. So thank you again for coming in. Matt, thanks for joining us this morning. That was an unexpected surprise. Nice having you here as always. And we'll wrap this one up here. If you guys, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to reach out to Scott and you have questions, I'm sure he's a great guy. I'm sure he's going to be willing to answer it for you. Go to that website that I posted earlier in the presentation. If you guys are looking for remote demos from either Chant or I, they're available to be signed up for, where we can kind of log into your console, walk you through some challenges that you might be having, or demo new features, etc. And that is I'm going to read it off here, Venue, S6L demo, all one word, at avid.com. You can sign up. It's kind of a first come, first serve there, but you're welcome to do that. And we can help you out across the old interwebs. Okay.
Yeah. And I had a question pop up about MADI, asking if this setup is using MADI and Dante at the same time. And the answer is yes, it is.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we'll turn you guys loose. Thanks again, everybody, for coming in. We'll see you hopefully on the next Avid webinar, where we tunnel down and solve all the world's problems. All right. We'll see you guys. Thank you very much for attending. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.